afternoon. I'm Francis Levy. Ed Nersessian and I are co-directors of the Philoctetes Center, and welcome to Evolution of the Gods. And I firstly wanted to thank our media sponsors, Jonathan Estrich, the Leon Levy Foundation, and Aaron Gorell and the Gorell family, who have helped to make this event possible, along with our Roundtable sponsors, Mary Lou Allen, Pauline Batum Pinto, and the Wunsch Foundation. Before we get going with the Roundtable, I just wanted to point out our current exhibit, which I'm very proud of, curated by Hallie Cohen and Adam Ludwig, and it's attendant upon our six-part On Aggression series. We've done the psychobiology of war, the psychobiology of genocide, the politics and psychobiology of genocide. We're doing violence in the city, and we had an initial one on aggression, which is referencing the Konrad Lorenz classic book. Here we have this large painting is by Margaret Rolicky. We have Robin Two's paintings over here, and these are extraordinary photographs by Alexander Gibbon, who photographed some of the Rwanda survivors' testimony, and then we showed a film related to this last week also. And over there are works on paper by Joyce Kozlov, and small sculptural elements over there by Leah Poehler. I did want to also say that we have a very large audience here today, and there's about 50 people downstairs, and we want to invite them to come up afterwards to ask questions of the panelists. Philoctetes, as you know, has been hit hard by the current financial difficulties, in particular the Madoff scandal, and so we lost our endowment. And we have gotten an enormous outpouring of support from those of you who enjoy our events and others. Much of it unsolicited, actually. But we need it. We need constant and ongoing support. So if there's any element of our program, if you like the poetry series, if you're interested in videography and the fact that we transmit this all simulcasted over the world on the internet, and that we record everything on a 3-camera setup, and that it goes into our past programming archive on the site. Like in 3 days, this particular roundtable, you go on the site and you can see it. So that availability, that is all is something that you can support by tagging your contribution to a particular element. We also have a jazz series. We're going to be having a math program this fall. We're going as if we have money. I'm now pleased to introduce someone who I really have had a great pleasure in knowing, Tyler Volk. Tyler Volk is Associate Professor of Biology and Science Director of the Environmental Studies Program at New York University. I first met Tyler because he's in a band called the Amygdaloids, which plays Joe Ledoux, the neuroscientist, founded it, and I was so impressed with him that I had to get to know him and found out that he does other things besides playing music. He teaches a course called Transdisciplinary Investigations Across Multiple Evolutionary Scales, which includes the evolution of gods, and he has a passionate interest in the structures and functions of all systems and how they weave together. Volk's books include the recently released CO2 Rising, What is Death? A Scientist Looks at the Cycles of Life, Meta-Patterns Across Space, Time, and Mind, and Gala's Body Towards the Physiology of Earth. Tyler Volk will moderate this afternoon's panel and introduce our other distinguished guests. So take it away, Tyler.
Okay, thanks, Francis. Sounds like the microphones are working just fine. So we didn't do a sound check, but everything, I can hear it over there. We can talk at normal voices, and it should be good. So I'll say just a quick few sentences about the idea of this roundtable today, introduce the panelists, say a few more words, and then put out some specific questions to start things going. And I can tell from the discussion we had already back there that some things are going to get pretty lively. And I hope we're going to perhaps come out with some conclusions or new directions on religion. But this is not really the big hope. But let's think big for a second, okay? And so the idea. So I'm a biologist. I do work on the biogeochemical cycles, the history of the Earth. But as Francis said, I also have interest in patterns, and I wrote a book called Meta-Patterns. And in there I was looking at gods that tend to be more centered systems of gods versus gods being a dispersed. The idea is that gods are everywhere and every object sort of dispersed. And there's two ways the human mind thinks, in centered systems and dispersed systems. And I'm not trying to put this forth as a scientific proposition, but you can find these patterns in many different areas. And a number of years ago, I had this vision that religions and gods where gods are often, sometimes they're not portrayed, but sometimes they're portrayed almost as biological beings or cognitive kinds of beings, and that one could make trees or systems almost in the way that the biologists make trees, phylogenetic trees of organisms. So in the way that the bacteria gave rise to the higher cells, and then from there, let's say we went into the vertebrates, and fish gave rise to amphibians, and from amphibians, reptiles came off, and you get these tree structures, and there are patterns of radiation. So there are often key inventions, such as the skin of the reptiles that allow the reptiles to live on land, to be fully terrestrial, as opposed to the amphibians that are still half land and half water. There were key inventions. These evolutionary steps didn't just happen. I mean, there are gradations, of course, but often there are key inventions that cause these branching points, and then once these branching points happen, there's often large radiations. They talk about the radiations of mammals. And I had this vision that, no, in some ways religions, work the same way, in that the Protestantism that comes off of the Roman Catholics, once Luther and Calvin and the others came off of Catholicism, then there was a radiation of the Protestant, let's call it a philosophy or Protestant religion. And before that, there was Christianity that came off of Judaism as a line there. And so we're going to go into some of these issues and compare these processes, maybe what causes, what are the social dynamics, cultural dynamics, psychological dynamics, historical, environmental. And so today we are, I think, really honored to have, first on my left here, Elaine Pagels, who's a professor at Princeton University. And I was told I don't have to read everything that was on the sheet of paper because you have that, but I'll just say a few words that her books have meant a lot to me, particularly the Gnostic Gospels and Adam and Eve and the Serpent, and your work was really just opened my eyes to the dynamics of early Christianity, and she's still exploring these in recent books with a book on the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Judas, and recent work on Revelations that is ongoing right now. So welcome, Elaine. I'm really glad that you're here. And then someone on Elaine's left, Beate Pongratz-Leisten. And she is from Germany originally, but she's been at Princeton in recent years, and I was just glad to see, just this morning, I learned that she's going to be a colleague of mine at NYU starting in September at the Center for Ancient Studies. And we just met for the first time, but she was giving a paper at NYU several months ago that I could not attend because I was away, but when I saw the title of the paper, it was called The Astralization of the Gods, and she deals with ancient Mesopotamia. And I just from the title, I knew she could fit this panel because it was dealing with some kind of transition in how we see the gods or how the gods were to people. So she was kind enough to send me her paper from that talk, and we've had some email correspondence. And we talked a little bit now back there. So the original idea, I thought, a lot of the audience is going to know quite a bit about the Buddhist trees and the Christian trees and Islamic trees of the gods. But sometimes the ancient Mesopotamia, which takes us back farther in time, you go to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and it's almost like you're entering the Twilight Zone or something there. The figures are just so different and a little bit alien, and yet we know that we could have, anybody in this room could have mated with any of those people and given rise to viable offspring. It's Homo sapiens, right?
Sure, shave down a Neanderthal.
So we won't get into the Neanderthal issue because that's still controversial. But I think we. Okay. So Beate, thank you for being here today. And then on her left, we're very honored to have Robert Wright, who also came up from Princeton, and Bob's been, I have to also say, your books have really meant a lot to me, all four of them. I've read them carefully, starting with Three Scientists and Their Gods, moving on to The Moral Animal, which really brought the science of evolutionary psychology to the general public of not only in the intelligentsia, really, of the country. And then a book, Non-Zero Sum Games, of how there's been the dynamics of systems over time have created new systems all the way from biological to cultural evolution that are more than the sum of the parts, which have given rise to the great wealth that we experience today, although it's going down. But I'm still optimistic about the long time.
Until last month.
Yeah, we're still. And Bob, he has a book coming out in June. I just asked him when it's finally coming out, called The Evolution of God, in June. So he'll be able to talk today about some of the aspects of his forthcoming book. And then finally, on my right, Jennifer Michael Hecht, who joins us today from Brooklyn. Yes. She teaches the New School, and her book on doubt, I was reading last fall, and I was so enthralled by your book that I wished I had invited you to this panel, which was already full. But as soon as there was a space opened up, I invited you, and I'm so happy that you joined us today. The book Doubt, she traces, I liked her word doubt. It's really tracing the history of doubters of religion. You could call it the history of atheism, but I like her word doubt. It's a little bit more positive word.
It's also concerned with philosophical doubt. How can we know anything? And so I trace the history of skepticism, which no one had ever really done. And no one had done a whole, from the beginning to the end, the history of skepticism as a particular form of thought.
Mm. And as a result, you basically had to know a lot about all the religions of the world, pretty much.
That's
so
right.
You're here.
Mm-hmm.
You can't escape now, too late. Beate, I said I would start with you first because we were talking about Mesopotamia, and maybe you could describe, just in fairly briefly, this idea of the astralization of the gods. It sounds like there was some kind of transition that happened back in Mesopotamia.
One must say that I'm working with a time where we have a polytheistic system, religious system, meaning that there are a lot of gods out there, and even more than the category of God, because in fact everything at a certain point of time can be divine. So my question into this entire idea is rather what is divine in ancient times rather than what is a god. I mean, we think in this Darwinian approach of categorizing the world, but in ancient times, beyond we are divine anthropomorphic agents, you have all kinds of objects or celestial bodies which can take on a divine status in a particular context, and who are assigned agency. So it's very much about what has agency for the human being at a certain moment of time in a certain space. Mm-hmm. And so this idea of astralization is just one aspect of divine agency in the ancient world.
And what does astralization actually mean?
And astralization means that already with the first beginning of writing in the 4th millennium, towards the end of the 4th millennium BCE, we have texts which refer to the goddess Inanna of Uruk, who was imagined anthropomorphic, as the Venus of the morning and the Venus of the evening, so the Inanna of the evening and of the morning. Meaning that at this point already, beyond having a deity with a temple and a household, an economic household in these ancient times, you had the idea of astral aspects of a deity. And so to this deity Inanna was assigned the planet Venus, meaning that you in certain context were observing the sky because it was very helpful for orientation during nighttime. In these countries like the Middle East, before the introduction of the camel, you couldn't cross the desert or the steppe. And so you needed the moon and the stars, the planets, in order to orient yourself. So I think very early, even before the canonization of astronomical compendia in the second millennium, much earlier you have the observation of the heavens in order to orient yourself. And naturally, you assign to it, because it cannot have any impact on it, you assign to it a divine quality. Yeah? And then you associate particular deities with astral bodies.
Now, you told me you started looking into social psychology or cognitive psychology, and that started influencing some of your thinking about this projection of agency.
Yes.
Could you say a few words about that?
I think what is very important for us is when we are dealing with ancient religions, it has been done under this evolutionary approach, or from this evolutionary approach of magic and then high religions, or magic, polytheistic religion, monotheism. And I think this is not a very helpful approach to understand how human bonding with the divine world, social bonding with the divine world works, how faith works. And so I found cognitive science helpful insofar as you have this acknowledgement of the human tendency to assign agency to inanimate objects as well as to animate beings. And there is not made any difference whether you take a boulder for a bear. You rather take a boulder for a bear because it could be dangerous if you don't. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So in order to cope with a very noisy and always moving environment, and as human being is, or the nervous system is out there to survive constantly, so coping with survival, then you understand why people or the humans tend to assign agency to all kinds of objects or agents, or to cars or whatever, doesn't matter. Yeah. So to me, this was very helpful that, in understanding that any object can crystallize the presence of the divine for communication. So it's not that I venerate the statue, but I take the statue of a god as the condensation or the crystallization of the presence of the God. Yeah? And so I do with a celestial body in another context, or so I do with a symbol of a deity. And so I do with the name of the deity. In polytheism, it's so important to know the name in order to communicate with the God. There is no anonymous God, and if there is an anonymous God, it means that you know this God very well because it's your personal God. Yeah, then you get anonymity, but otherwise you don't. So everything, body parts, name, and then extended tools or symbols can work on or act on behalf of the divine. And this is why I say it's so much more helpful to think about the category of what is divine rather than what is a god. Yeah, because this already restricts us very much into anthropomorphic agents. Yeah.
Very, very, very important. I'd like to turn to Bob because I'm wondering whether you'll be able to sort of move us forward in time from that a little bit. But in particular, I know you said your book is going to deal a lot with Yahweh, and not exclusively, but sort of the development or evolution. I'm not quite sure how you're using the word evolution in your book, and I'd like to hear you address that. But back in the room there, you said that Yahweh for sure has several strands of different God DNA in him. So if you could sort of move us forward a little bit in either of those topics about your use of the word evolution and Yahweh having these several strands of God DNA, DNA from different gods.
Yeah, well, when I use the phrase the evolution of God, I think I mean it the way you meant it when you named this discussion, the evolution of gods, which is to say I'm talking about cultural evolution, first of all, which, of course, is a tradition that goes way back, looking at bodies of cultural information, whether in science or art or religion, as beings that kind of evolve, has a long tradition in the social sciences. I actually start at the beginning in the book, which is to say with so-called primitive religion, the kind of religion that presumably preceded historical religions. Religion kind of enters the historical record around the 3rd millennium BCE in Mesopotamia, I guess. And then I do follow it forward and focus mainly on the evolution of the Abrahamic God, Yahweh. And I do think you can, this gets at one of the problems with analogizing cultural evolution to biological evolution. With biological evolution, you have these nice kind of clean trees. My family tree goes back in a very straightforward way. I only have 2 parents. All my DNA came from them. DNA can't jump from somebody in this room to me and start influencing my behavior. Whereas with cultural evolution, you have this kind of lateral. You can have this kind of horizontal transmission of information, this fusing of ideas. So it's much messier. It's not going to be a simple tree diagram. And an example is actually Yahweh, I think, because Yahweh, on the one hand, seems to have had a kind of independent, or there seems to have been a God named Yahweh that goes back a long way. On the other hand, there are elements of 2 other Middle Eastern gods that seem to be in Yahweh. One is a god named El, who was head of the Canaanite pantheon, according to the Ugaritic writings that have been uncovered. There are a lot of people who see some of El in Yahweh. And then the other one is the much derided Baal or Baal, the god who's constantly dissed in the Hebrew Bible. But the thinking is, among some scholars at least, that because Yahweh was in competition with Baal for followers, the way Microsoft and Apple, they're in competition, so they steal each other's features. Well, apparently some of that was going on, and they would appropriate, their followers would claim that kind of anything you can do, I can do better. And in fact, there's one case of a hymn to Yahweh in the Bible that I think now most scholars agree that it began as a Ugaritic hymn to Baal. In fact, among the evidence of this is that if you take out the word Yahweh and replace it with Baal, it becomes a much better poem, much more alliteration. So it looks like they kind of turned it into a worse poem by plugging Yahweh's name into it. So so through this kind of competition among gods for followers, you can get a kind of a cross-fertilization of properties. But I would say, in answer to your question, that a lot of scholars would say that at a minimum, this god Yahweh that had an independent origin acquired some properties, some kind of DNA from both El, that's E-L, El or Ale, and Baal.
And you're seeing it very distinctly as a kind of a competitive process of groups with different gods. Are you a supporter of the idea that the gods give these groups more power as groups in a cultural evolutionary dynamic, or there's another viewpoint in which that it's more byproducts and.
Now, you don't mean do the actual gods literally give supernatural powers to the gods?
I don't know. I don't mean that. But
you look like a secular kind of a secular humanist to me. But well, I mean, certainly, you could ask, and Elaine can speak to this. Do certain beliefs and doctrines of a religious group help that group thrive? I mean, in the case of early Christianity, I know I think it's your book, Beyond Belief, where you talk about how kind of, I think, admired Christians were for how caring they were, how open they were maybe to Well, it's your book. You tell me. But anyway, the point is there.
And we'll turn to her next.
Yeah,
yes.
a religion can have features that people find attractive, and if they find it attractive and join the group, then the group will grow. Now, and in the Roman Empire in particular, it was a very competitive milieu. There were a lot of religions out there competing for adherence. It was kind of an open platform, and so. Yes, religious doctrines that give strength in a certain sense to groups are more likely to survive and thrive, either in the sense that you will get recruits to your group because the ideas are so attractive, or that competing religious groups will steal the ideas because they're so attractive.
So let's turn to Elaine then, because thanks, Bob, for that. Thanks for the all those ideas. I think they're going to resurface many times in the next hour or so, because. One could see, I guess, Christianity coming off of Judaism as an extremely successful mutation in using a biological metaphor. But if we use just an idea of variation, if we talk about cultural evolution, just that there's variance. And as Bob was saying, in that time of history, you had all these competing groups in the Roman Empire, Mithraism, people talk about, like, ooh, if you look at it, Christians, the followers of Mithras, maybe it wasn't clear which one was going to grow big for a while. But so I'm wondering whether you could talk about what gave because one more thing. So Christianity kept the Jewish God, but God mutated, and now Jesus was also God, and this caused a lot of problems with things like the Arian heresy. Like, in other words, it became problematic how to define Jesus in relationship to God, right? So I wonder if you could just maybe talk about any and all of that. But in other words, Christianity is a successful mutation in a competing field of other opportunities, let's say, for people's beliefs.
Yes, Tyler, it's interesting because at first, I was saying, having grown up in a family of scientists, biologists, and then being married, my late husband was an elementary particle physicist, so I love science, but it seems to me very different. And so to use a Darwinian metaphor as if we're evolving from an amoeba to a dinosaur, it sounds like a progression in a way that it makes me nervous for two reasons. One of them is that it makes it sound like the later versions are better. And I've just been reading on the way up here on the train from Princeton two things. One is a 2nd century Christian polemic against Jews, insisting how much better it is, and how worthless the parent religion in this case is. And second, a book by Susanna Heschel, which is about to come out. Susanna Heschel is the daughter of Rabbi Heschel, who was quite an extraordinary rabbi in New York. But her book is about Christian elements in Nazism and New Testament scholarship. So I'm just saying, this claim that it's more advanced can be very tricky, and we have to be wary. That's one qualification. The other one is that, when Bob is talking about primitive religions, I've often thought, even liking religion, which I kind of instinctively did, to my parents' horror. You're supposed to have outgrown it. If you're educated enough, as we were presumably to be, there's something very primitive about it. I sometimes thought my own religion instinctively was animism, worship of trees or whatever, or the spirits of the trees. And also, right now, I'm writing a book on the Book of Revelation. There's not a shred of ethics in it. There aren't any ideas in it, hardly. It's all visions. It's all dreams and nightmares. And it's all about hope and fear. And it's not a conceptual book at all. And that's why I'm interested. I'm thinking, why is religion still around in the 21st century when it's very regressive in some ways? But, okay, now I'll speak to your issue.
What gave Christianity
I
so
thought
much
I had
power?
nothing to say in this discussion, but here we go.
It grew to a world religion, right? All these.
But I have thought. See, I'm a historian, so I think, why did this Christian movement become popular when it did, and for what reasons? And I think there are very specific historical reasons, and anyone who studies what I study is puzzled about that, because it's such a weird religion, you know? And when I was working on it, I began to think, okay, you're living in a world, as Beate knows, in which the gods look like the rulers, right? The god Marduk and his court look just like the king and the court, or the god Ra looks like Pharaoh and his court, or, you know, or the Homeric gods are also Zeus and Hera are the Lord and Lady, and they have tables and dinner parties and love affairs and wars, just like any other aristocrats. And the same, of course, is true of Roman gods. So how can you have a religious cult, a movement, a very weird marginal movement among Jews in the first century that says that God doesn't look like the emperor, you know, beautiful and lordly and commanding and beautifully dressed with a lot of deference, but actually looks like a condemned criminal, a barbarian. The Roman senator Tacitus said, you know, they worship a crucified Jew. I mean, he could think of not much worse than that. Mm-hmm. So it's a very strange movement. And then to see God, or claim to see God, I mean, I'm not talking about whether Jesus was God, because I think that's a later idea. Jesus certainly starts out very human in the early sources and becomes God later. That's another story. But the idea that God could be seen or manifest in somebody who was socially worthless, despised, illiterate, probably, and of a barbarian culture, and worse than that, just, you know, a condemned criminal for treason against Rome. And I began to think, how could that happen? Except that you're living in a world in which maybe 3/4 of the population are slaves, or other sort of worthless people, or people without status. And it's very often said in early sources that this movement appealed to rabble, to slaves, to women, to children, to idiots. I've been reading a 2nd century philosopher named Celsus who says, you know, anytime you find these people, they won't preach when educated people come around, but they go to the laundry workers, and they're out there with the cobblers, and people are cleaning the clothes, and they're telling them about Jesus, you know. And then as soon as anybody educated comes, they're quiet. They won't say anything, you know, because then the children will tell their parents that this is really stupid and idiotic. Nietzsche picked this up in his famous polemic called The Antichrist. So it's interesting. I mean, they did seem to be very successful among these people. And one suggestion I made, and that was in Adam, Eve, and the Serpent, the book about sex and politics and the early Christian movement, is that saying that sort of, if you could say God is with us in the form of the most socially despised person, you could say that God could be present to just anyone, right? And that anyone might have value. And these followers of Jesus, being Jews, publicized the Hebrew creation account, which suggested that God had created humans in his image. And it doesn't say what that means, and that's a big issue of dispute, of course, in the ancient world. But the idea that every human could be created in the image was popularized among Christians as the idea that everyone had dignitas, which means social worth or whatever. And dignity is something which most people wouldn't have had at all. So it has to do with a perception of human nature, which may have been becoming much more widespread as the Roman Empire was more and more in contact with all parts of this enormous worldwide empire.
And something
That's
like
just one guess.
Mithraism, what you say, which appealed a lot to the Roman army, it maybe had a more limited potential. Maybe it was, you know, sort of, it spread like wildfire, a virus, a computer virus, you know, for a while, but then it had a sort of inherent limitations, perhaps, in the kind of group it appealed to.
Mithraism appealed to the army and military people primarily, and women weren't, for example, allowed in that particular cult, as far as I know. And so this other one, actually, another advantage, unlike Mithraism or the Isis cult, you could be initiated free. I mean, if you go to Mithra or Isis or Aleutian mysteries, you have to pay an initiation fee, you have to have the right clothes, you have to be of a certain social status. But the Christians would take you anyway and baptize you.
Okay, interesting. Well, thank you. We'll come back to all these issues. Jennifer, can we turn to you now? Okay. So we haven't really talked about the East at all, and your book really carefully documents doubt and skepticism both through the West and different threads of the West and the East. And there was this Caravaca group that was 700 BC or 600 BC that was really doubting, I guess, the Vedic tradition. And so there's a number of things, because you had certain opinions about the tree structures versus the complex networks that happen, which I'd be happy to.
And I also have to respond to all this, so I think I'm ready.
But okay, but I did want to ask you one thing though about the East and West, like whether it almost seems to be, and many people have said this, that there's this Abrahamic root, and then there's this that's been incredibly rich going into Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and then there's been this sort of Vedic root that's been similarly rich, where Hinduism came off that, and Buddhism came off it, and Jainism came off it. Probably not the kami of Japan necessarily. That was more an indigenous thing.
Right, that was separate.
That was separate,
but the rest of it, look where everybody comes from.
Yeah.
They come from actually pretty close by geologically. If you step back from the Earth a little bit, these people were mingling. So the East and the West were taking each other's ideas more than is generally discussed.
More than generally discussed.
But I'll start with other things when you're ready.
Oh, go ahead.
All right, there's a bunch of little things I want to say. The evolutionary tree idea for me, it didn't really work because I think religion is more like art, and people throw things up in all sorts of different times. That some kind of a tree might be drawn for original ideas that you never see pop up anyplace else, but those are I would imagine those are very rare. For me, religion is part of how people feel, and that there's always doubters who look over and say, yeah, I feel that way too, but the story you're telling does not make any sense, and I don't believe you, and I'm going home. I think that there were people in every single religious group throughout all history who did not buy it, and I have lots of proof. Moving on. The notion of Jesus and how big he got, Jesus, of course, had this Jewish population who was listening to him, but if you have to join Judaism to join Christianity, you need to get circumcision, and a lot of people find that problematic as an adult man. So they joined Christianity. They joined Judaism without joining. There were tons of people who would go to the huge Passover ceremonies. And in fact, the Alexandrian Library was begun with the idea of translating all the vast cultures in the Hellenistic Empire, after Alexander the Great mixed it all up, into Greek. And the first person they picked was Jewish, to translate the Jewish texts. So the Jews had a Greek text long before Paul starts selling Judaism, Christianity to other people. They had a Greek text, and they had lots of non-Jewish followers, even in Judaism before Christianity, because they liked it. They liked the idea that the diaspora was so huge, but then everybody goes back to Israel and has this party. And that's what they did. They had huge parties for the big ceremonies. And then they started having them in Egypt as well, because there were so many Jews there, right? In Alexandria. So, how did they sell this religion? Why did this religion appeal so much? Well, one answer is that, the things that people liked about it, people joined for. And they changed it as they went. I want to mention, but they had this Greek text. That's one thing I want to mention, and that a lot of people were already interested in Judaism because of the one God idea. Seemed interesting. You add it to a mystery cult, you might live forever. Not in any way like we want to live forever, but kind of live forever. But a lot of people didn't buy that either. They were drinking and dancing and having sex in the mystery of religions. But anyway, what I want to say is that in order to defend yourself against a very educated culture that wants to kill you, you get awfully sophisticated. So the old thing that you are what you eat. Christianity ate Roman culture, ate the Roman philosophies and really killed them, but became them. Took on a ton of their ideas to argue in terms of skepticism, in terms of all these different things. What's wonderful is that before Jesus, every religion was about doing. You have to show up at the Greek statues. You got to show up at the right ceremony. You got to show up when the emperor walks by and bow down. And in Judaism, you got to do the stuff. You tell the rabbi you don't believe in God, he says, fine, go back to praying. You got to do the stuff. And the first time that a religion, Judaism's the first time a religion gets separated from its place. Well, Christianity is the first time that belief becomes an issue of religion. Belief was just not an issue. This is what your parents told you about the world, and you did either buy it or not, but nobody told you to believe. That was never spoken. I searched, and it's so easy now with the internet. Go home and search belief, or in the Jewish Bible, and then go search it in the Christian Bible. It shows up like a little carnation, like a little rose of red around Jesus, and then it keeps going. And it's not there in the beginning. Nobody's saying believe, believe, believe. Nowhere in the world. And then Jesus comes along in a very advanced culture where they had already had all these advanced systems of doubt, so that people had said, oh, your God looks like a man, so what's inside him? You got a pancreas? Does he have a butt? Does he poop? Does he have a butt without a need to poop? So what's inside there? So you got a God. I mean, it's funny, right? You can start to... And so they made fun of the idea of a human-looking God so much that they got rid of it. Zeus and Hera were already ridiculous because of how they behaved. People had thrown that idea out. By the time of Plato, nobody believes that stuff. That's why he says, all right, let's assign the names of the gods to the stars and kind of have a rational religion. Because Plato knew you needed to party in order to have a religion, something that somehow missed the 20th century. But it's true, and the sophistication had to be very high to look at the whole situation, to see the history of doubt and how complete it was, how beautiful it was, how much the ancient Greeks proved there is no God or gods. This is the world. Let's do it. Nature works. Nature is enough. Let's just live. Let's figure out how to live really instead of pretending. And they had gotten there. Mm-hmm. How do you get Christianity after that? Mm-hmm. How? Mm-hmm. And the answer is by inventing the leap. By inventing the notion that I'm just going to leap into this, by saying, this isn't true by any means possible.
The belief leap?
The belief leap. Let's all just jump over that it isn't possible and believe that we will live forever. So let's just. Well, I think it's equally easy to realize that death does not exist for any one of you. I mean, do the scientific test 3 times and ask yourself if you're dead. You're never going to be dead. You're never going to do that test and turn out dead. Life is this. This is life. It's outrageous.
This is the Epicurus idea that you're not going to...
It's Epicurean.
When death comes, it's not it's not going to exist in our mind. I mean,
Epicurus is beautiful about it. Lucretius even sells it even better, and it talks about all the famous people who were so wonderful who are dead, and how it doesn't matter how long you live. There's this isn't a play. You're not going to miss the last act. It just goes on and on. If you got in, good for you. Anyway. And the people you loved that have passed are safe in the first reel. Why would you want to be here where you have to do dishes and everything? I mean, it's not such a big deal, death, if you just give it a little thought. But in a culture that keeps feeding the notion that we're going to live forever, why not go with it? But there were always people who said, I don't think so. What, all the mosquitoes live forever too? So where do we draw the line? Monkeys who wear clothes, yes, but not who, I mean...
So we're hearing here some other ideas of what gave these movements power, and you're saying they had to.
I think they're social. I think they're fun.
They had to invent something. I mean,
but Epicureanism was huge too.
These have been enormous. Yeah, Epicureanism. Yeah. Enormous. Yeah. Well, then at one point it got put down by law, right?
Down by law. That is correct, and not by. So did Christianity win, or was it circumstance that has something to do with politics that we don't look for quality, but rather just situation?
Well, one of the options is when you get your God into the ruler.
Right.
I mean, that's good in terms of the replication ability, because then the rulers can. They talk to a lot of people.
Sure, the rulers
so it spreads.
But you would also be against the ruler. But you wanted to know about the East, and I'll just say very briefly that.
Okay.
Did you want to go somewhere else?
Let's do the East, and then I want to revisit some of the.
Sure, absolutely.
Bring this back to the
I won't say much about the East. Just that when you follow Buddhism, it's as great a story as when you follow, Judaism, Christianity. It goes to a different country, it learns what they have there, it changes for them, and it moves on. It starts in India and dies out there, and then it goes into China, and as it goes into these countries, it takes on the religion that was there, the qualities of it. A lot of them had gods, but the Theravada movement that did not have gods did very well for a long time, and it's still alive today. The Theravada takes its origins from the Buddha and says this world is this world. There's nothing else to talk about. If there's something magical going on, which there is, because consciousness is bizarre, right? We're all in these little heads looking out these eyes. It's magic. So there's something that's magic. Love is magic. It's inexplicable but consistent. But it has some proof. I can find the people. I see what they do. So I think I'll just say that the East has an equally fantastic story that a remarkable number of Buddhists don't know at all, as if Buddhism was this sort of bowl that you can sort of hand over. But it really is so specific to these different stories, and it gives you different things at different times, just as Christianity.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. So hopefully we'll return to some of the Eastern issues. Beate, I wonder if there's anything that's been said that you want to now discuss.
I would like to, because I see several things happening. One is religion is equated with God, and to me religion is so much more than God. It's the community, it's the practice, it's institutions, it's theological discourse, or the discourse of real experts talking about God. So religion to me is much more than just God. This is one thing. The other is your notion about religion as a story. And I would like to go back very far in history for my understanding at least, and look, for example, into hunter-gatherer societies. And what happens in their definition of communities. And what you can see from archaeological evidence is that although there were mobile people, apparently they gathered around sanctuaries in order to honor their ancestors. So what I would like to bring in as another notion is the divine as a carrier of identity, a carrier of where do I affiliate myself with, ancestor spirits as something which extend, as you say, beyond death. So there is no real boundary between our world and the world beyond, but I can have this idea of continuity, having a telescoping genealogy reaching far back to an ancestor. Yeah? And then what do these ancestors do for me? I mean, in very early times in a mobile society, they assure the kinship groups and their social bonding, their identity. In later times, when we have texts, we can see they get a legal connotation by defining inheritance rights. So who possesses the ancestor spirits is the legitimate heir to the house of the father, yeah, and owns the property. So, but then with a very complex city society, you get these hierarchical structures of the divine reaching from ancestor, personal god, city god, supra-regional pantheon to the chief deity, and all these actors are out there in order either to define your identity or act on your behalf in a certain context. So to me, the divine world is a very complicated system of bonding, defining identity beyond just belief, as you say, which comes in very lately only with monotheistic religions, because then I have the notion of conversion. Before that, it's all about properly communicating, properly acting in divine presence and with the divine presence.
to ask you about something Elaine brought up, that we want to be careful of too close analogies with biological evolution. And even
Yes.
in biological evolution, we don't really want to talk about, progress, although there's some kind of, there's a whole debate you've been involved in for a long time of, whether there's certain branches that you can say got more complex over time. But do you see any large-scale, trends throughout the thousands of years of human history in the divine? Or is it somewhat
Bob was talking
closer?
about the figure of Yahweh, and I think my major point, how we perceive of the divine, for me has to do with how we perceive of the person in antiquity and in modernity. And in antiquity, the person is very much about social roles, about function, about status, about rank, about particular roles. And if I have this kind of a notion of a person who is not an individual, but is a personage, a type, a representative of a social stratum, then it's very easy to transfer roles and functions onto, from one deity to another and accumulate them finally onto one deity in order to define the supreme deity or in order to define the monotheistic deity. This is very different from our very modern notion of the individual, which is, very much about the interior self-understanding. But in order to understand the transition from polytheism to monotheism, I think you have to look into the notion of the person, of the understanding of the person. And so if you ask me if there are, long-term evolutionary things, to me there are breaks. And it's the breaks which are transitional periods which to me are important, and then I have to look for the political, historical circumstances. As Elaine pointed out, it's very much about marginalized people adhering to Christianity, in contrast to the aristocracy and the established people. So this is a very important historical, political,
Elaine, you want to follow up?
social.
Yes, I'd like to comment, because what you said, I look at religions not as belief systems until that's really late, as you say. Absolutely. I'm looking at 4th century where that comes out in Christianity. And there's 300 years of Christian movement before it gets there. But right now, Beate, I've been designing a seminar for Princeton on invisible beings that have to do with gods, goddesses, Satan, demons, and angels. And many stories, from Enuma Elish, which is the Babylonian creation story, through Aristophanes, through Plato, the Iliad, many stories in the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, the Dead Sea Scrolls. And I see these as cultural languages that are not just about gods at all. They're about social values. I started writing about Adam and Eve and the serpent, not because, I don't believe in evolution, on the contrary, but to say, why is this story so, why does it have legs, for thousands of years? And realize that, of course, it takes on many transformations in different historical periods, but what it does is it answers questions like, why do we work as hard as we do? Why do we die? What's the relationship between male and female? How do people bond in social groups? It's about work. It's about every practical. It's about sexuality. It's about every practical aspect of life, and that's how it's read and that's how it's interpreted. And the same is true of Satan. It's about identity and how people see themselves and how they identify others and how they distinguish themselves from others. So I see that as a matter of social values. And in that sense, I totally agree with you that it has a sociobiological function. I think that's what you're saying, too. I remember asking Edmund Wilson, I finally got to ask him a question. I finally met the man and said, I've been wanting to ask you for 20 years, about the sociobiological function of religion. And he said, yes. And he said, even now when I go to talk about ecology, he said, my Baptist Southern roots come up, and I preach hellfire and damnation, and then I give them the way of salvation, and then I give the altar call. It's just like a sermon of the Baptist church I grew up in. So it has the same structure.
Sounds like
And-
he's consciously picked up on it, too. He's
But he
consciously
has.
transferred the...
And I think these things
what
do
works.
have a tremendous social function
Yeah.
in the way they're played out.
Bob, you want to...
Well, on the issue you brought up of progress, I might have a slightly contrarian view. I mean, I do think in the realm, if you talk about moral progress or the moral development of God, which is a lot of what I'm focusing on in my book, I do think there's one sense in which there's been a kind of a net moral progress, and that it kind of has to do with what you were saying, Beate, about community and the relationship of the individual to community and the definition of community. How broadly do you see community as extending? So, I mean, I guess I would say, for starters, I would say if you compare a highly ethnocentric view, that is to say our group is better than all the others, to a more cosmopolitan view, that is to say members of other ethnicities are human beings too, they deserve decent treatment, I would call that moral progress, first of all. Okay, so I'm positing that as a possibly questionable assertion, but anyway, that is the backdrop of what I'm saying. I think clearly there has not been, relentless progress with no backsliding, because if there were, we wouldn't have a lot of the problems we have in the world today. If all three Abrahamic religions, if all of their adherents were thoroughly cosmopolitan in this sense, we would have a lot fewer problems. On the other hand, the Abrahamic God, I would say, has repeatedly shown himself capable of making the kind of evolutionary leap we need now in terms of his ongoing moral development, and gods in general have. In Mesopotamia, at the very dawn of history, it seems to be the case that when individual city-states were first woven into a regional polity, religion made the necessary adaptation. That is to say, gods primarily associated with the individual city-states were woven into a collective pantheon, and the pantheon was respected by all of the city-states. So that was a case where religion adapted in a way that that nourished a larger definition of community. And I think the Abrahamic God has repeatedly shown
It's almost a symbiotic idea, or they kind of combined in a way.
Well, yeah, I mean, my argument is partly that when two groups of people perceive themselves as having a non-zero-sum relationship, having something they can gain through cooperation, their religions are more likely to make the adaptation. They're more likely to be open to the existence of another religion, more tolerant toward that religion. And I argue that you can see that in the Bible in terms of when the Israelites are more and less tolerant of other people and other gods. But as for the Abrahamic God, this kind of moral development is most famously associated with Christianity. But I actually think you see it in all three of the Abrahamic religions. Of course, in Christianity, it's you have this famous kind of crossing of ethnic lines. Paul says, there's no longer Jew or Greek, male or female, all are one. And of course, this makes sense for Paul because he's trying to establish a church that is going to extend all across the Roman Empire and will cross national and ethnic lines. And I actually, part of my book is excerpted in the Atlantic that'll come out in a few weeks, and I look at that as kind of a case study, that Paul and the evolution of the doctrine of transethnic love. But I think in the other two Abrahamic religions you see comparable things. In Islam, you can talk jihad all you want when you're trying to establish an empire and conquer people, but when you've got an empire to run, it's in your interest to extend tolerance to diverse groups, and you very much see that in the Quran, in subsequent Islamic tradition, which is to say they develop doctrines of tolerance toward Christians and Jews. Even in the Quran, there are passages, surprisingly, that say that Zoroastrians are eligible for salvation. One passage arguably says that about polytheists, but that's a case where the religious doctrine adapts, and I think you see the same thing in the Hebrew Bible. It's a harder argument to make because, for one thing, the dating of the text is contentious. It's not always clear what was written after what. But I think you can make the argument that after the exile, when the Israelites were part of the Persian Empire, and they weren't getting kicked around by various empires, you see more tolerance toward other peoples. For example, Jonah, which was probably a post-exilic work. You see God being very compassionate to the Ninevans, who are Assyrians. I mean, the Assyrian Empire had tormented Israel before the exile quite a bit, and you have the scriptures to show for it. But once Israel is in a kind of a non-zero-sum relationship with the Assyrians, you see the doctrines of tolerance evolve. So I think you, at a minimum, see repeatedly in religion and in the Abrahamic religion the capacity for God to evolve in a way that facilitates a more cosmopolitan, more universalistic ethic. And that, at least that capacity, is I think, cause for hope.
Yes.
I just like a quick comment, because I didn't mean to suggest that there was no movement, obviously, or what we could call development. I just that as an overall model can be a problem. But if we're talking about social value structures which are embodied in these imaginative constructs and these stories, these religious stories, it's certainly true that the Christian movement emerged in the time when the Roman Empire was in a wide sense of communication throughout the known world. And one thing you do find in these sources is what you said is, what did you say, sort of an ethic that goes beyond a particular...
Well, a cosmopolitan ethic or...
Yeah,
or
I mean, they start calling themselves a new race. And it's the idea that the race, the genos, is the people you're born into. But you can actually join this race by choice. And everyone, it's kind of the idea of a human race, which emerges there. The idea of one that you can voluntarily join just by choosing to, no matter who you are by birth. And that is an interesting social and cultural and perhaps religious shift.
Sure, the race idea is very particular and very rare that they say that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just thinking about what you were saying, and the one word you didn't use was friendship. And when people are smushed together, they eat each other's food, and once you eat someone's food in their home, you kind of are friends with them in this way. So cosmopolitanism has always been about either war or drought or famine. Something has to mix people up. It doesn't have to, I guess, an overall government kind of thing. But usually something mixes people up, and so they make friends. And then once you make friends, you go to enough Christmas parties, you're Jewish, you figure, what the heck, you put the tree up. And but really, what is that? What happens? Does the tree become an American thing and Christianity doesn't use it to mark itself off? Friendship. Friendship changes these feelings that we have about who's a stranger. I think a lot about morality. I don't believe in God, and I have become sort of a minor famous atheist, so I get invited to places to go tell them that there's no God, which is really easy. And, they give me somebody to debate with. But again, it's not like I'm arguing poetry over prose. This is really easy for me because it's what I believe. And the point I want to make is that because I don't believe in God, I believe that human beings invented morality. And I find that sort of exquisite. And I find that this notion that we get better with morality, I think is, for me, the way I put it is that human beings made up one morality. That morality is actually pretty simple. It's just morality towards an equal is pretty much the same all over the world. It's who's an equal. It's who's an equal. So everywhere, not to step on somebody's toes, not to sleep with their husband or their wife, not to hit their kid for them. There's a whole range of things that really, it shifts a little bit here and there, but Morality, whoever you make a bond with, don't cheat on it. There's a lot of simple stuff. But the question is who's an equal. And cosmopolitanism can do that to a whole area at one time. But we can see these areas where there's a lot of morality. Everyone's talking about morality, but they simply cannot believe that children deserve it, or that women deserve it, or that people who are browner than them deserve it. And that's, it seems to me, we don't have to work on this question of morality. We have to work on this question of who gets it.
And just go back to the East for a second, because I wanted to ask you a little bit of why you think humans have found these imaginative constructs so incredibly important. I mean, some have to do with the projection of agency. Some of the cognitive psychologists are saying that since we project agency onto another person, these agency parts of the cognitive.
Beate was saying about these kinship things. Why would you stay in it if you don't believe it? And again, that's my thesis. A lot of people didn't. But this.
But it was quite small in some sense. I
this identity, this notion
like
of
these little,
I don't think
these little
so.
convergent streams, and then now it's huge.
No, I don't think so.
You think
it's been huge all along?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And people
Like
talk about it all
40%
along.
And that, you know.
People go through different phases in their lives, so that's one thing.
Yeah.
But you know, Freud's idea that we have parents, and so that most fundamental moment in our life, that first 20 years, which, boy, if you live there, and it doesn't matter if you live 50 years someplace else, you're still from there in all sorts of ways. Those first 20 years, you have parents who the brain clearly twists into thinking a whole lot of good things about them, even if they're beating the hell out of you. So I really think that you go on for the rest of your life with a sense that you could ask forgiveness, that you could ask, could somebody make the world better for me, because of that sense. It's not an original thought, but that is what I think, that we had parents at one point that we could ask. And I do think that a lot of people...
And you think the religion is kind of that story writ large?
Well, I think doubters were always being problematic for believers, and that's the only reason religion changes. I mean, the biggest reason religions change is because somebody says that doesn't wash. I can follow Christianity through. It's always. Somebody says there was so much skepticism before Descartes that he thought that we couldn't say anything at all. Fideism was established in the Catholic Church. That skepticism was true. We can know nothing. Our senses are faulty. Our minds are faulty. We're these little blobs of protoplasm on this planet. It's crazy that we would know anything. So we can't know anything. There's a huge history of skepticism, and the Catholic Church had decided to take it on. Montaigne sold them Fideism, this idea, you can't know anything, we can't know if there's a God, let's go with it. Let's believe what we used to believe, let's just keep going, let's believe anyway, but we don't know. They've stopped proving it. I just want to say, Descartes' big thing, I think, therefore I am, why is that so interesting? Why is that surprising? Because he needed a place to start that he could say something is. And he knew that his senses and his mind could lie about all of this. The one thing he could count on was, I doubt, therefore I am. There's something that's doubting in the middle of the universe. And he does say, dubito ergo sum. I didn't just make it up. But he does. He says, because I'm thinking, because I'm worrying, because I'm wondering, there's some me. And I feel inside me God. He leapt right from there's some me, which I'll go with, though the Buddha would have said, I think, therefore I think, right? I mean, but anyway, he goes right from I can prove myself's existence to I also feel God. And then he goes straight from I feel God, so he must be good. And a good God wouldn't trick us with all this, so we can count on reality. Mm-hmm. That's just one of these beautiful times that the church says to the big I don't know, well, here's something else. Mm-hmm. And that's cool, but it's ridiculous to sort of miss it, because doubt is pushing all the time. Mm. But it doesn't have to convert everybody. Everybody knows where the doubters are. We're in the university. Come get us. It's not, we don't have to.
If you want us, we're here.
If you want us, we're in the science department, in the poetry department.
We're not going to force it on you.
Exactly so.
Maybe some
we
of
don't
us.
have to do recruitment, because all you have to do is look around and say, I'm not so sure. And then you come to us.
Francis, you
No,
spoke.
I was going to say, I say Sumir go Kogito, but that's just my own little fetish. But I'm surprised that the golden bough hasn't been mentioned here. I'm going back a little further in terms of the notion of cognition, in terms of the notion of association. I mean, in discussions of religion, the golden bough is often mentioned here. We're talking about anthropology. We're talking about the formation of thought and belief systems. Is there any? Does anybody have? Everyone's looking at me quizzically.
It's been a while since this has come up in my mind. Unless you want to say something yourself, go ahead. How's that fit into?
I have to think.
Oh, you wanted to bring it up. But look, let me just, one thing about the East, and so the Theravada tradition, right?
Yeah.
Southeast Asia. There seems to be a convergent evolution. I mean, and also one thing that happens in biological evolution, wings get invented by bats and birds
Right.
independently.
Strange,
right?
yeah.
And I think one can posit that this kind of thing happens in
I agree.
cultural evolution of religions too, where certain
They pop up in
patterns,
other places with different bones.
Like certain people of you might have even mentioned in your book the similarity between, let's say, the Christian saints, or the saints coming in almost as a pantheistic,
Very
growth.
much as a pantheist.
Yeah, and comparing that to the Mahayana bodhisattvas.
Yeah.
The bodhisattva of compassion,
For
of
sure.
wisdom. Almost these associating gods with gods or goddesses with various attributes.
Yeah. What happens actually pretty late, and I don't remember, there's an Eastern philosopher that starts with an N and it's gone. But anyway, thank you. He comes along. Thank you. Yeah, and comes along and says, look, we so can't know anything that we might as well step into the unknown too. I mean, he does. He's a skeptic. He too just says the Theravada system didn't have a God in it. But we're not branching off from the Theravada. We're still branching off from the Buddha. We go all the way back to the Buddha too, because the Buddha once Zen goes back from, Zen's pretty recent, but they say they go back to the Buddha too from the one Lotus Sutra.
Holding
because
the flower.
one time somebody said to him, what's the meaning of life? And the Buddha handed over a flower. And that's really the origin of Zen. To say, look, this goes back to the Buddha because the Buddha knew that sometimes you have to snap your way out of crazy, of believing.
But then these
wrong.
bodhisattvas, and you look at
Yes.
Tibetan, you look at Vajrayana, and the incredible
because
imagery.
He let them
right?
out, and I half want to follow them into crazy. Like they that's where they come up with the Buddha verse where you can eat by smelling. There's one of them. There's Buddha verses all over the places with different Buddhas and candy ones, and they come up with all this stuff based all back on this notion that the trick is to snap you out of what's wrong. And if I can snap you out of being normal by kicking you, I should kick you. If I can snap you out of being normal, if I can teach you the numbers from 1 to 10, the spirituality of the world from 1 to 10 by counting to 10 straight through. Or I can just start to talk about 10 over and over and over until you intuit where we're going. That is, you can leap over things, and poetry and art and religion ask you to make this this gesture into the absurd. That's where I'm trying to say. I believe that the Mahayana has accepted the absurd, and it's with a kind of that is, I believe, what their tenet is. That the Buddha had, and Zen very much in that vein, that the Buddha knew that sometimes you have to just be very strange, and someone will notice that the world they believed in is a little bit of a hallucination, because we are living in hallucinations.
In cultural evolution, we get this tension. The Protestants come along and they want to destroy a lot of the iconography of the Catholics. Right? They want to become more of the text, more not proliferate images so much. And the Islams and the Jews that almost forbid the imagery, and
they were getting creamed.
And so I don't know, Bob, what's that about in terms of cultural evolution, or Beate, in terms of these different, almost convergent, almost these rediscovery of different kinds of approaches. I mean, does that fit into anything you've been?
I'm gratified that you think I would have the answer to that question.
Yeah.
That's very flattering. And I don't think I do, though.
Yeah.
I think, when you look into, Ellen mentioned this, that gods seem to imitate rulers, yeah, or chief gods at least. So what can I add to a monotheistic God as quality if I have already omnipresence, omniscience, immortality, all these kinds of superhuman qualities? So I think one thing is remoteness, and but the interesting
remoteness is a strategy.
Yes,
yes.
But the interesting thing about this transcendent, very transcendent, very remote God is that even if you communicate with this God, it's still in an anthropomorphizing way. Yeah,
right.
Even this remote God whom you are not supposed to depict in an image. When you communicate, he is supposed to listen to you.
It's cognitive.
Yeah?
There's a cognitive.
Yes,
Say
exactly.
About the remoteness, also
right.
you can use the world in a different way if you've decided that God and the divine are all up there. Then all the people and the trees and everything are yours to mess up in a way that they're not. So I think cultures that do use a lot of the world for themselves, they want the God to be remote in a way.
Yeah. Well,
Elaine.
That reminded me of something in Elliot Wilson's rather brilliant book about Jewish mystical thought. He points out, it's called Through a Speculum That Shines, that Jewish mysticism and Jewish tradition saying no image of God. God is not to be imaged, and is always inviting you to see his hands, his feet, his anger. He's like a mother, he's like a father, he's like a king. All the time, the Hebrew Bible is masses of anthropomorphic images, while always prohibiting them. It's a.
Can I on this issue of remoteness, and I think we kind of mean transcendence here, right? I mean the notion of a transcendent God. There are a couple of ideas you hear. I mean, one is that this is a kind of adaptation to evolving science. In other words, it's a way of, to the extent that God and gods had been invoked in the past as explanations for everything that happens, well, if they're supposed to be these hands-on movers and shakers, and suddenly you start coming up with other more scientific explanations of why things move and shake in the world, then the natural adaptation is actually they're just kind of up there, and they're more like a chairman of the board than a CEO, and they're just that's one thing you hear. On the other hand, the notion of transcendence comes in before science is really moved very far. So I mean, there was Babylonian astronomy and starting to see some regularity in the skies and so on, and realizing that actually eclipses, you don't have to do any special ritual to make an eclipse come to an end. It just happens, and in fact, they show up at regular intervals. So there's all that, but still, science, when transcendence starts becoming a theme, science actually hasn't progressed very far. Another thing you hear a little is that in the case of Yahweh, that the exile and the events immediately preceding it had an effect. Because remember, immediately prior to the exile, the Babylonians destroyed the temple in Jerusalem. And this is where, if you had an anthropomorphic conception of Yahweh, as I personally think they probably would have at the time, most people, the idea is that he lives in the temple. I mean, that was the standard idea in those days. And so you have to ask yourself, wait a second, if they destroyed the temple, the way people interpreted geopolitical events in those days, if something happened to you like that, it was A, your God just got bested by another God, B, and possibly killed or something. I mean, if they destroyed the God's house, that's a problem for your theology.
Yeah, plus he's mad at you.
Plus he's mad. Well, that was the other explanation. No, right. This was the standard explanation. A way to preserve your belief in your nation's God, in the God of Israel, when bad things happen, was to say, well, he is punishing us. It's not that he's been bested by the God of the nation that just beat us. It's that our God is choosing to punish them, and that you see that as an explanation for the exile. But also, one possibility is that it was that in reaction to the fact that their God no longer had a discernible home, you may have started seeing more abstract conceptions of divinity. But anyway, those are the two kinds of explanations I've heard.
I kind of think it jumps to the text pretty fast. I'm sorry, you go. I think it jumps to the text pretty fast. Remember, they take the best people, they take the smartest people, the Babylonian exile, and the people who stay behind pretty much convert to the religions that are around. But the ones who go to Babylon, they're the ones who decide then and there that it must be that not just the priests are supposed to follow these weird washing and doing religious stuff, but everybody's supposed to. And we should have known that, and we weren't doing it, and God's mad at us. And so those rules of living, all the washing and everything, all the different prayers for every little thing, that happens after the Babylonian exile. And so the behaviors and the texts that they put together, that's the period of time they put together the Torah. So the text and the being away. It's the being away. When they come back, they can't believe the people who lived there didn't, this is the people who rode by the waters of Babylon. I sit down and wept, which everybody from Byron to the Rastafarians have taken on as their, anybody who's in exile. But when they came back, they still had the religion because it had become these behaviors and the text. I wanted to just speak to the iconography of with the Jews. That was one of the reasons that the Jews survived, even though they were this tiny little country. Like the Romans would march through thinking it was no big deal, but they had pictures on their shields, and the Jews wouldn't stand for it and blocked their way and simply died and scared the hell out of the Romans because they had never seen people stand there and say, kill me, fine, I'm not letting you do this. And they ran away. They stopped. They did not march through. They ran away. They thought these people are too much freaks. I just want to say also with the really.
Can I ask my question?
Yeah, sure, please.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Beate, what do you see as the function of the divine? What is the reason for its existence and what is its function? Because you implied that in the beginning it had to do something with the stars. And what is it?
No, I didn't imply that in beginning it has to do with the stars. Inspired by ethological research, I think it has very much to do with bonding. Yeah, so that you build communities or bondage with either your ancestors and then in a more complex.
Why choose that to bond?
Why choose to bond?
Why choose that? The divine to bond.
Because it works.
Because it works.
Why not?
Your mic on, you wanted to?
So let me that
Doesn't change because can't find
right. So
it.
that's an interesting answer.
Could I say,
There
I was
possibilities of things that would work.
Just-
Why that one?
Because you have,
Yes.
I mean, you always have things you can't explain. So you need an explanation which is out of your normal daily life
So
perception. This is one thing that you need to explain. Or
So
have
one function is to make sense of
to
what
make
you
sense
cannot
of
make
what is
sense of.
surrounding you.
And so,
But the other then is also very much about, I would say, the more complex society grows, the more you need legitimizing for what you are, what you do, and who is claiming dominance over the other. So you need religion for a lot of.
And it was just something that came out of a class. I was teaching with a friend who's a scholar of Judaism and a rabbi, and the students, this was at Columbia, weren't interested in what we were saying so much. They wanted to know who was right, the Christians or the Jews. And at one point, one of the Jewish students said, but, where are the Babylonians today? And I said to her, well, what do you mean, alive and well and living in Brooklyn? And she looked at me like I was crazy. But what impressed me was, because the ancestors of those people are, here. But I'm just saying she had a sense of herself and her people that goes back 3,000 years. And that meant a lot to her. And it was a real sense of who she is. And that's what I meant by what it works.
yeah, well, I don't dispute that, but I think that we are trying to, in a way, the divine serves the function of helping us explain things, which then, if that is the case, it seems to me it would be inevitable that there would be doubt.
Yeah, I think
In
there
other words,
is
how
doubt,
can
but
you-
but
how
let me
can
also
you-
say that we have to pay real attention to what we're talking about, because what if everything that bonds people together that doesn't have another function gets called religion? then we don't have to ask why is this the thing that's picked to bond. These things that bond people are called religion. Community, meditation, and ritual. Human beings seem to need them. They're happier when they get them. Community, meditation, and ritual. You have to find the smartest person who convinces you that everything's okay in a text and read it every single weekend. Secularism doesn't always learn this. It has to learn this from religion. You got to get together. Community, meditation on a good text or in silence, and ritual. You got to do a few little things over and over to make yourself feel that certain things happen.
Can I say something in this discussion? Because I think, this entire discussion goes into this antagonism, either religion or science. And I think it's not something which works exclusive, because you can have a symbolic religious system and nonetheless be an enlightened person. Yeah, so it's not something which works exclusively. And this shows, and I bring now an example from, about 800 BCE or 700 BCE. These are incantory prayers you would perform during childbirth. And the way or the metaphorical language you would choose very much reflected the physiological knowledge of the placenta, and that the baby was there, had to go down the channel or whatever in order to be born. Nonetheless, you have creation myths which talk about the human being being formed out of clay and mixed with blood of a slaughtered god, and in order to infuse intelligence. And so you can have both systems side by side, and they work perfectly together. Yeah?
That's why I was trying to mention the Golden Dawn before.
Yeah, but I wanted to say something to the Golden Dawn.
Linguistic elements, in terms of synecdoche, metonymy, the figures of speech that enabled the gestation of these types of concepts to be in language. Although I'm not sure about. That's why I'm not sure, because religion does exist in pre-linguistic forms also, I suppose.
You were going to...
Yeah, I wanted to say why probably you didn't hear much about the Golden Bow anymore among historians of religions, is that it's a wonderful collection of a lot of cultural analogies. But as Fraser had no interest in looking at the very historical or functional context, rituals or whatever would work in, it's useless. How do you want to, there is no universal religion. There are cultures having religion, but there is no universal religion. And even in cosmopolitan times, which I think go much more far back than Bob claims, because in antiquity, people didn't think in the terms of border and didn't think in the terms of discipline. So there were no classics and no ancient Eastern studies, but people were Levantines or ancient Easterners living under Greek or Roman control. But there was a lot of migration, deportation, mobility in these ancient cultures, much more than in our today understanding. But were
you saying that the Fraser scholarship has a certain relevance now? Is that what you're saying? Or?
It doesn't have to. I mean, at least to my approach, which is a very historical one, it doesn't have much of a relevance.
Scholarship.
I think
the
that's
history of the history of religion. That was
it's so wonderful, though.
the question I was just poking Tyler to ask of you guys. I love Durkheim's elements of religious. Did you read that? Sure. Gosh, I love that.
Sure.
I find it such and that does not fit in. Fraser went and looked or took stories, and Durkheim didn't go and look. He didn't go, but he, for my understanding, he's one of my favorite theorists of religion. He certainly thought that what people thought was God turns out to be that weird thing that happens in community. When people get together, you feel differently than when you're alone. It's weird. If you haven't done a demonstration recently, go, and it's a weird feeling. It feels great. And Durkheim said that was God. But he explains so much that, for my mind, he was writing in, 1899, but it's, for me, that's still a powerful book.
Should we just open it up now? I think I know people are waiting. So you have to come to the microphones and get in line. Wow.
How significant?
Everything okay? Is that
I don't know. Is it working?
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
go off.
How significant?
Okay.
How significant, in terms of the tremendous size that Christianity became, was the decree of Constantine, the Emperor Constantine, in bringing it to be the large size that it became, which otherwise it wouldn't have become, and if it wouldn't have been Constantine, it would have been some other emperor. That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the and by the way, as somebody said, a lot of them were had been slaves or agrarian peasants.
Right.
How significant? How could it? Is it possible to have atheism as mass a thing if capitalism would fade away, or it wouldn't fade away, would be destroyed, so that atheists and doubt would become stronger, so that would become a mass thing like Christianity became, in order.
You do the first one.
Well, you two were both talking about it with Constantine.
I think we all might have
You
mentioned
all,
Constantine.
yes.
It just didn't happen to,
Yes,
right?
because
Constantine was a big deal.
That was a big deal. But without it,
This is really quick because
Yeah.
there's so many questions. It's a wonderful question, but it's really only then that belief becomes the litmus test of who's a Christian. And that's because Constantine wants to unify the empire under one religion and one religious system, and he was very effective. So that's about the year.
after 300 years.
It's about 360 by the time it gets really established.
Yeah.
I know it's 323.
Well, that's the council,
And then this
but
question is
it's
now.
not established for
This
another
question
40
is out
years.
because, Kierkegaard comes up with, if you want to believe, you just got to believe. It's like it's not anything to do with logic.
Confucianism is a religion without a god, and it was a religion for many, many millions of people. And they lived without a god, but they lived with the other aspects of religion. So could there be huge areas where everybody's an atheist? Yeah, and without even noticing it and without even making it an issue, because it's, it's...
Without a change in the economic system?
Well, the economic system should be a changing. I don't know what's going to go on there.
Okay, we're over here. Sir.
Thank you. This address to
what's your
the
name?
entire panel.
Say who you are, because we have so many interesting seeming people. Say who you are.
What do you do? Say say your name and who you are.
I'm Milt Sirota. I just want to make a side comment in watching the panel and remembering what I do sometimes, not only putting people on the couch, but talking face to face, and particularly lately about, you could tell about whether a person is lying by the way they move their eyes. A new TV program, I don't know whether any of you have watched it, but I've been watching people's eyes in the face-to-face, and it just amazes me that we go up like this when we're talking about something related to conscience, but mostly in relation to their belief that there is someone up there watching them.
Did I look down?
In that spirit, I was sorry. I wondered whether in your research and in your writings, you looked at the extent to which the people in the various cultures have dealt with their fear of death and their belief in an afterlife as a way of bringing God into in the picture of their struggles to need to have something present afterwards. Now, in a different light, the struggle in societies, having come back from the Mayan ruins from Belize 2 weeks ago, where child sacrifice was practiced extensively. And the reason often given is that that's what God wants, which we know is a projection of some conflict we have about our children, which we attribute to God. So I was wondering whether in your research you've come across the extent to which adults in the culture do practice child sacrifice and have not resolved the major issue to produce a tikkun olam in our world throughout history because we have not had enough respect for whom we create?
Woohoo! I like that.
That's a good question.
I like that a lot. Boy, I like that a lot. I think that that's just dead on. I think people have not yet figured out how to raise their children kindly, and children are little adults in so many ways from the time they're about 2 years old. And yeah, I do think that a lot of religion comes out of a projection of that conflict.
Elaine, do you want to say anything? Or
I would say that as far as the polytheistic religions are concerned in the ancient Near East, I don't know of a conscious notion, a concept of sacrifice of human beings. The notion of sacrifice is already something which is very different from the notion of offering and paying homage to the gods. Yeah? So I would make a distinction there. And then, I mean, we have in the Phoenician context, so I'm talking now about the 8th, 7th, 6th century BCE. We have these Tophet burials with children, of which there are a lot. And people have been talking about child sacrifice in this context. But on the other hand, you must also see that there have been a lot of stillborn babies in these times. So, and perhaps in a particular context, when you are a colonizing people, you treat the death of this child differently in another context, and then you perhaps offer it to your God, to your, whom you brought with you in your colony. So perhaps there is still a lot of discussion going on how to evaluate this kind of child sacrifice. Otherwise, I don't know of any human sacrifice in my context in the ancient Near East.
I want to quickly say there's the same controversy about whether they were actually exposing babies, because it seems that people would afterwards go looking for their baby, and in the literature they always find them. Somebody picked them up to raise as a slave or something.
Yeah.
So
I think the notion, I wrote an article on the how did it come that something like the concept of Jesus' sacrifice is possible, and what the ancient Near East contributed as concept, because it's not only about offering or sacrifice. You need a lot of notion of substitute and payment for your sins, or payment of what you have done. So you need a lot of notions in order to come to this idea of a self-sacrifice, for example, which is completely, in biological terms, controversial to what human species does.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, Marty.
Yeah, I'm Marty Hoffert. I'm a professor emeritus of physics, and Tyler is actually a former student of mine. I'm very proud of. I'll try not to talk too much, though, as a professor. I want to say something about the evolution of the idea of God. I mean, which is, we haven't really been discussing the evolution of God. Of course, we haven't defined God, but let's just take a wild assumption, kind of a Carl Sagan, Arthur C. Clarke assumption, that some extraterrestrial intelligent race had a role in fostering evolution on Earth. Anyone who's seen 2001 knows the gist of this argument. And in fact, sometimes I think we're more like a graduate student experiment of some higher intelligence. Put us on a planet with a limited amount of energy and resources, just close enough to a moon to have space flight, and see what we do with it. Are we going to be, and what would that God, because they would be gods to us, have learned from us? What would be the arc of their personality? But I'm not going to talk about that. I want to talk about our concept of God.
Question, Marty?
My question is that it seems to me that Homo sapiens have not progressed very much in terms of our concept of God. We basically, fundamentalist religions are making an enormous resurgence all over the world, in Judaism and Christianity and Islam. And what one might think of as the more modern versions of traditional religion, Reform Judaism, Unitarianism, I don't know, Mormon, Scientology. Those, to the extent that they embrace the ideals of the Enlightenment, I don't see them making much progress. In fact, it's a losing battle to the point where you can despair whether Homo sapiens are going to be capable of living sustainably on this planet when such a huge number of members of Congress, for example, don't believe in evolution. And I wonder, if, from a practical point of view, if we may be very hardwired to these fundamentalist religious ideas. Thank you.
So, Bob, I imagine you have something to say there.
Yeah, I mean, I take it by progress, you don't mean the moral progress I talked about earlier, but more in the way of intellectual progress as reflected in compatibility with science.
Yeah, consilience, I like.
And I think you're right, you don't see much of that. And one reason is, I think there are, for example, Theravada Buddhism, I think is the manifestations I've seen are pretty compatible with modern science, do psychologically for people a lot of what religion has done. So I don't think we're without examples. On the other hand, I think sometimes attempts to do this wind up kind of not doing the things religion has done. For a while I was a member of a Unitarian church, and then I quit being one because it was just there was just so little belief. That it was just kind of like a good government league or something. I mean, just kind of like you people coming together and seeing each other and saying hi. And if
There are good ones. There are good ones.
They're good. They're morally good. I totally approve.
I'm saying ones that are fun, where they know that you have to have cake and you have to have songs.
We had cake. But I can get cake. Anyway, let me say, just as to the one other thing he said, I don't think religion is hardwired in the sense that that belief in a God is a biological adaptation. That is to say, I don't think religion, there are genes kind of for religion. On the other hand, I think there are a lot of genes for a lot of little things, ranging from a capacity for awe to a tendency to explain mysteries in kind of anthropomorphic terms. Remember...
Do you think there's a gene for that?
I don't mean a gene. What I mean is, in the evolution of human cognition, the biological evolution of human cognition, it's quite possible that if you ask, when did our ancestors first start thinking consciously about causality and saying, what caused this, what caused that? It was in a social context, and they were saying, he hit her, she stole that from him. It may be that if you ask, when our very capacity when it made sense biologically to start consciously reckoning with causality, it was about what other people were doing to other people. And I think it may be partly
what was happening to yourself?
Well, no, what was happening to yourself, but the point is, it was about a causal universe in which the causal agents were people. I think that may have been the first stage in the evolution of consciously thinking about causality. So we very readily attribute things to anthropomorphic causes. Now, science has kind of carried us beyond that, and we kind of now take that for granted when we grow up in this culture, but I do think there are deep-seated human tendencies of many and diverse kinds that are collectively conducive to religious belief, even though I don't think religion per se is an adaptation in the biological sense.
I realize this is going to be impossible. I think we should encourage people to really ask questions and keep it short, because we have a lot of people that had a very fascinating panel today.
Question, please.
Question?
I have to refer to what Mr. Wright said, however, because don't you think that this cognition started way before people and people? It started with the fear of the natural disasters like hurricanes and floods and earthquakes, and that's how polytheism began, with early man creating a god for this and a god for that, and a way of protecting or praying for protection or looking for protection.
Yeah, I was talking about how genetic evolution set the stage for religious belief, but I think what you're kind of asking is, if we look back at the very beginning of the cultural evolution of religion, when it kind of got off the ground and started evolving in a cultural way, what was it about? I think if we assume that the observed kind of hunter-gatherer societies, their religions are somewhat reflective of the hunter-gatherer societies that existed before there was civilization, so that these religions are kind of like the precursors of the religions on the historic record, then I agree with you that absolutely what religion is fundamentally about is asking, why do good things happen? Why do bad things happen? What can we do to increase the number of good things and reduce the number
Or
of bad
fear
things?
of the unknown.
Disease, whatever. Yes.
Now, my actual question.
Yeah. Well, although that question, the problem with evil, why do bad things happen to good people, doesn't really arise until you are attributing moral character to gods. In other words, when you're assuming that gods are good, which was not the assumption originally. Very good.
Yeah, the title, Evolution of God or Gods, in the sense of what I heard here today, I don't think, I'm not sure the question was answered. But okay, let me just very quickly. The question is, during all of this discussion, unless I missed it, correct me if I'm mistaken, nothing came up about scientifically evolution, the Big Bang Theory.
No,
And the
cultural evolution. So.
And the concept, the theory of the God within us all, as a result of the Big Bang Theory, which is Kabbalistic and other. But I thought that would certainly have been a major part of this discussion, based on the title.
Well, I think God within us all would be one concept of this.
And vice versa, excuse me, God within us all and us.
So, I mean, we're talking about the different forms that religion and God concepts have taken over history, and how much they are a result of in a way, inventing new cultural adaptations to make them grow or to fit into the human mind or to fit into human needs. And so we've been hearing a lot of ideas around that, which certainly fit into the concept of cultural evolution, in which there's replication, because people that believe in God, let's say a Christian God today, there's been a couple thousand years of that concept, not exactly the same concept, but a kind of a lineage of the concepts being passed on through iconography, through texts, through individuals' beliefs. And then
Well,
there's
I wanted the connection with science. What I'm driving at is the connection with science.
Right. Well,
Like,
You said talking about a scientific proof of that?
oh, no.
That the Big Bang leads to?
I mean, what I'm hoping is that we take and there's a lot happening nowadays with the books everyone here is writing and what they call the social, the cognitive psychology of religion. I mean, there's a lot of research going on. It's very like the last 10 years have been like a very hot 10 years in terms of research on these topics. So I'm thinking that fairly soon we're going to have a much better scientific understanding of the evolution of God when we tie into the particularities of the historical events as well, because those serve in a way as the data to produce these theoretical constructs, in the same way that Darwin was able to produce his theory of evolution because he saw so much more of the world than anybody had seen before him, because he had firsthand knowledge of fossils in South America and living things in South America. So as we're bringing people together here with different forms of knowledge about God and religion, the idea is to bring it into a larger picture. Perhaps whether it's going to be called a theory or not, I don't know whether we can say, and I'm not going to say at this point, but we're sort of heading towards something.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Olga Ast. I am conceptual artist from former Soviet Union and came here 15 years ago. And my question will be about I would like to return to this devolution conflict. So when we are secular super intellectuals dispersed in the society, in Christian society, we kind of very intellectual people. But when we got our state in Soviet Union, we created our own religion and even put a mummy in the mausoleum on the Red Square. And also there was doubters as well, but they doubt in atheism, not in Christianity. Right. So, and they were most intellectuals in the atheistic society, not the other people. So, and so what do you think is that evolution or devolution, and and right now, but it's right now when socialism failed. Right now, it's very dangerous situation in former Soviet Union because Orthodox Church got enormous power, and I personally just signed a petition. They start a court process against artists who made exhibition against Orthodox religion, and even their gallery own was beaten by a nationalistic movement. But that's what was it?
Well, maybe
evolution or evolution?
I'll just try to answer this.
Make the question short and the answer short.
Yeah, so I'm going to answer this short. Evolution versus devolution. I mean, we would need better metrics to. Now we have to ask what are we actually measuring? We're going to try to put this on some quantitative scale, and I don't think we have that yet. Something along lines of community or social structure, but I don't think we're there yet to really answer these questions of directionality.
Okay. So what strikes me as I've been listening to all of this is what I've noticed as a distinct lack of an observation of our epistemological frameworks. In other words, we're all kind of making, or it seems as though the panel is centered around making assumptions which are somewhat focused on believing that one can understand certain things that are at a higher level of abstraction with our mind alone. I don't think we can necessarily understand the mechanisms of something at a higher level by using intellect alone. In other words, I see that there's a difference between wisdom and knowledge. And I also see a distinct parallel between fundamentalist atheism and fundamentalist belief system. And it strikes me that there's many different ways to knowing. There's knowing through the mind, there's knowing through the heart, there's knowing through a marriage of the two. And I wonder how many of us, approaching things from an intellectual framework, can see the distinct irony that we are not seeing, that we are looking things within an epistemology that's limited. And I would also just like to say that historically, there's been a distinct shaping of societal mechanisms for a very long time, which lead our belief systems in different directions. And how many of the panel have actually, and I'm just curious, this isn't a condemnation or an approval from my own personal judgment system, but how many of us have actually sat down and approached ways of knowing authentically for a long time to see if there's personal experiences that can lead us to something other than knowledge, but direct wisdom?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I think I have to take it first because of the atheism. I called my book Doubt, and I started out, when I finished the book, I know I have to be quick, I respected religion a great deal more when I finished the book. When I had always wondered, how could Augustine, who said these wonderful things about time, how could he have believed? I went back and searched, and I became convinced that the ways of knowledge are deep and strange. And I wrote my book with an attempt to say, here's what I believe, but the ways of knowledge are deep and strange. And I tried to refer to that in many, many different ways. Certainly a lot of believers have been negative believers. But to not even get into that whole thing, I just want to say that the atheist books that came out in the last few years have been so popular, not because they're the only ones out there, but because they're the most obnoxious ones out there. And so they're exciting to read. And they're very obnoxious, and they're also really easy for even an atheist to take argument with. Because I believe in love, and I understand that love is not provable, and love and faith are awfully close to each other, I have a profound respect for somebody who has a thoughtful belief in a world that is that can be referred to only by art. And so I am personally trying to start an atheist movement that calls to art for its metaphysics rather than science. As a historian of science, I see all the holes in science, and it's problematic for me.
Can I make one comment, or is it?
But we can talk later today.
My name is Carly Rogers, and I've been a student of many religions since I was a child. I've noticed that today the focus has been on the Abrahamic traditions, and I think there are two areas where the Abrahamic traditions, as presently exemplified don't go deep enough. One is in our relationship to the divine in the natural world. And if you go and spend time among American Indian communities, you will find not what is pejoratively often labeled as animism, but a sense of the sacramental and of the divine in every living being as an expression of the breath of the Creator. That's on the one side. On the other side is something to do with the relationship of consciousness, the existence of consciousness in the cosmos. Where the hell does it come from? Does it depend upon biological instruments, or is it something beyond that? And in Buddhism, you find two things. You find the creative possibilities of emptiness, not as a negative annihilation of reality, but as the creative sunyata into which things are possible. The Heart Sutra says, for form is emptiness, and emptiness is form. It's a very strange thing, but the more you think about it, the more you say, oh, if it were all chock-block full of stuff, nothing new could happen. So if you are seeking Satori, if you are seeking nirvana, it is not annihilation. It is communion and participation and expansion into cosmic consciousness. So where in the Abrahamic traditions do we find teachings that connect those two things? And I would suggest and ask if I'm right, that it's in the mystic traditions.
Elaine?
It is in the mystical traditions. Christians call them heretics, Gnostics. That's why I wrote a book, Beyond Belief. It's not about belief. It's about something else. The other person spoke of it.
My name is Mark Stallman, and I'm a dropout from Divinity School. A long time ago, University of Chicago, 1970. I have a brief question. We haven't talked about entheogens, the current name for what used to be called, Elaine's going, what's that?
What is that? I don't know.
Once upon a time, psychedelics, mind manifesting, was a topic. That name has been changed now. Now they're called entheogens. So the name, the term of art is that you become godlike. And all of the religions, including Christianity, Judaism, that are being talked about here, have entheogenic aspects. There are, from the Eleusinian mysteries all the way through, there are participation in rituals and initiations that involve entheogens. Is anyone on the panel researching that topic, and is it possible to research that topic in a respectable academic way?
Yeah, she did it already.
Not lately. No. No, I'm just...
No, that Gershom Scholem's book is still rocks. It still does the trick, and that's on Jewish mysticism, and it's in most intellectuals' houses. But you have to actually read it. It's really good. You know, the book that discusses the entire the mystical tradition in Judaism, and that's where that's going to happen. Were you talking about drugs?
You need to talk to the guy in the
Of course I'm talking about drugs.
Drugs, drugs.
People took drugs and had godlike experiences.
Right, exactly.
I think there's a relationship between that and shamanism, right? Shamanism goes way back as the first priests and the having of the visions. So the psychedelic drugs helping the imagination have visions.
But you can get there just through meditation or fasting or sweating and those other things.
Religion begins in mysticism and ends in narcissism. The comment that I want to make is that, William James said that, we should not close our account with reality. There is something more going on in consciousness. But when we take the position of being an atheist, aren't we closing our account with reality? And secondly, what is the status of hierophany? Mircea Eliade, the scholar of religions, he said that religion began as a hierophany of the mystic who had that experience, but then language came in the way. So when we look at the computations that are going on, the discourse that is going on, it's formal operational. It is not transcendental, because transcendental cannot be talked about.
But how do you deal with the problem that what you call transcendental, maybe your mind, maybe your imagination saying things to you that you as a biological being that's going to die say yes to because of that fact, of it satisfying existential fears.
So it's a maybe.
Right. Yeah.
But the atheist question, I don't know what people think the word atheist means. I started my career saying doubt all the time when I really meant atheist. Now that I say atheist, I do so because I started to get so angry at Bush that I decided that I better speak the truth, because especially in my books, who do I love? The ones who speak the truth. So I just wasn't going to be careful about it. You know, Bruno got burned. I think I could handle it too. So my point is that atheism is a strong word. To me, it only means that I do not believe there's a blue giraffe under my chair or any of the other stuff you guys could make up.
Okay, go.
Hi, my name's Damon Gaverno. I'm a second-year student at Union Theological. And I just want to, in terms of the evolution of God, my question is, Joseph Campbell makes the point that these mythologies around the world and throughout time could at the time be reconciled with the culture's scientific understanding, and that because we're in a place where there's such a discrepancy between the two now, he proposes that we need a new mythology. Mm-hmm. So my question is, I was just hoping someone could speak to the necessity, the possibility of a necessity of that, the feasibility of that, and also, if so, would that be something that would need to just sort of happen organically, or is there something we can do to help to bring it about?
Well, Campbell actually suggested the Earth. Right, in one of his discourses, he was suggesting the Earth, the image of the Earth. You see the Earth.
Sure, I was just curious as to what the people here might have to say.
Me sort of studying the carbon cycle and biogeochemistry, and I like that idea too. I think we have to center our minds on something, and the collective, the world. For me, the beauty of science is the objectivity of it, in the sense that anybody can do it, right? If you had the equipment, you could do that experiment too, and you should be able to find out approximately the same result. And so we now understand a lot about the way the planet works, and I think internalizing these workings can give us a sort of sense of belonging to each other. There's been a lot of discussion today about the social belongingness, and certainly some of the great environmental issues, such as the increase in carbon dioxide, that is a global issue, can serve as a unifying theme. And
how would you distinguish that from humanism as opposed to religion, though? I'm
Take
thinking,
the God out, there's no difference. That's the point, and a lot of humanists these days understand it and do all the stuff with religion except that aspect.
The supernatural.
Yeah, there are lots of places that humanist churches.
Can I just say
I'm just curious.
This is maybe relevant. Maybe this is the kind of litmus test you would use to say, but is that really fulfilling the role of religion? One of the few definitions of religion I've come across that seems to me to encompass all of the things that have been called religion, including some kind of close to secular versions, and including the kind of thing that could be viable in a scientific world, is William James saying, religion is the belief that there is an unseen order and that our supreme interest lies in harmoniously adjusting ourselves to that order. And I think you could start there and just have a very interesting discussion. Could it be a strictly scientific order that you're adjusting? We all agree we have to adjust ourselves to the laws of science, or does it have to be an order that imparts purpose?
Does it have to be order? Could chaos work?
Not according to William James, and I'm with him on this one, I think. But
the Big Bang happens, and then the world explodes, and then it dies.
Well, right, but if we're talking about people structuring their lives and their beliefs and everything, and structuring society, one thing successful religions have done is served as a basis for a coherent social order. And they don't always do that, and they threaten not to now, and that's a sign that they need to evolve further, or else they'll be doing damage. But
I think, this is what the function of mythology is, at least in polytheistic systems. It serves as a system of explanatory system, and gives pattern of orientation. And because you have several gods, you must explain the constellation and relationships and hierarchies, which reflect societal hierarchies. So back to your question whether there can be a mythology about one god only, I doubt it.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Peter Irwin. When I think of, first off, the notion of evolution, quickly, the notion of progress in evolution. Evolution, I believe, as my understanding, is an association, causality link. And so to say there's progress, for instance, the dinosaurs got wiped out, there was an interaction with the environment and people had to adapt to what the current environment was. There were no people there were dinosaurs. They would say, gee whiz, are human beings really an evolution from us? We kind of thought life was pretty good in our time. So, but the point I would only make is that if we drop out the notion of progress and you just think of evolution as adaptation, and now actually think about what we mean by evolution of religion, we should really be starting, I believe, with where language began in the earliest human states. Maybe 50,000 years ago, where some people talk about a big bang having occurred because there was suddenly a large cultural evolution. My question, I'm going to make a cute kind of question here, because now I want to talk about the transition. If we went from the earliest points of human beings where we actually sort of thought about agency, and then we got some shamans that said, well, agency, they became the experts in agency, and so then they want to build up their own role in their societies. They didn't want to go around hunter-gathering, and they wanted to be the experts in agency. They were also the experts in medicine. They saw what was going on around. They paid attention.
Has to go, and as soon as you tell your question, you got a chance to
Okay, so the quick question is, the shaman was getting more and more, and finally, at the point of
question there?
Yes. At the point of Christianity, at the point of Judaism coming, the shamans got people to actually sacrifice other people. They got food first, and now they're getting you to sacrifice the virgins so that they could get a little sex. And now, all of a sudden, you've got a one-God religion notion, and the question is, do you think this is a reasonable explanation for that transition, that what they did was, and that's what's in the Abraham-Isaac story, you suddenly don't have to sacrifice. It was better than the two-tone halava and the hula hoop. You now can go to one God. You don't have a lot of gods to please. You only have one God to please, right? And you don't have to sacrifice. You don't have to give up any. So there's an economic advance. Do you think that that plays a role?
You answered your own question, I think.
Just quickly, sir, please.
Yes. When Gustav Mahler converted to Catholicism, he was challenged by some of his friends, and they said, how could you do this? And he said, it doesn't really matter, because in the end, music is my religion. So that's what I was going to say. There needs to be some way to develop a new religion that allows us to still experience awe, a sense of wonder, whatever is conveyed to us by music, subliminally, what is conveyed to us by poetry, and still allow us to be rational.
Come to our meetings.
And I agree. Mahler is a very good place to start, too. I agree. There are books to sell.
Further information about our programs and a complete archive of past Philoctetes events is available at philoctetes.org.